suprême. Et cette Cour est en train d'être mise en place et se cherche. Et donc, on ne peut pas s'intéresser à la transparence des finances publiques sans s'intéresser à la question de la dette. Et je pense que AfCODD nous a apporté une conscience au niveau du Bénin, au niveau des acteurs de la société civile, parce que, comme vous le savez, le Bénin fait partie de l'UEMOA, de l'espace économique et monétaire ouest-africain. Et dans l'UEMOA, il y a des normes, on appelle les critères de convergence. Et par rapport à la question de la soutenabilité de la dette, l'UEMOA a retenu 70% du PIB comme seuil à ne pas dépasser. Alors, les pays de l'UEMOA, chaque fois qu'ils sont en dessous donc, de ce seuil, disent bon, on est en dessous du seuil, on n'a pas de risque de surendettement. Et le Bénin aussi est dans ce cas. Et donc, vous voyez, le gouvernement, il présente la situation, il dit « je suis en dessous du seuil ». Mais ce qui a fondamentalement changé au Bénin, puisqu'on parle de la transparence du budget, il y a la transparence aussi donc, dans la gestion de la dette. Le Bénin a créé une direction. Avant, c'était une caisse autonome d'amortissement. Ça a été renommé cette année en caisse autonome de gestion de la dette, qui dispose d'un site web, qui publie chaque trimestre des statistiques sur la dette. Le Bénin, les nouvelles autorités, quand elles sont venues, bon, je pense qu'ils ont levé 1 euro bon pour rembourser toutes les dettes à taux variable du Bénin. Donc aujourd'hui, le Bénin n'a aucune dette à taux variable, à taux variable, donc c'est des dettes à taux fixe. Et le Bénin va sur le marché financier en tenant compte d'un certain nombre de paramètres en termes de maturité, en termes de taux d'intérêt, en termes de devises. Et je pense ce que nous avons retenu, le Bénin semble être un bon élève de FMI. Je ne sais pas si nous devons nous en réjouir, mais nous, en tant qu'acteurs de la société civile, l'image que nous avons du FMI, quand on dit que notre pays est bon, on met un point d'interrogation. Si le FMI dit que c'est bon, alors il faut aller regarder. Et je pense que c'est ce que nous avons noté ici, et ces jours-ci, pour dire... nous devons, les pays africains, je parle des pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, il n'y a pas assez de partage de la stratégie. Chacun y va selon ses priorités, selon ses intérêts. Et je dirais même que les pays se cachent même leur stratégie. Je ne sais pas, quand nous étions à l'école, on cache les épreuves pour qu'on ne triche pas à notre feuille. Et je pense qu'en matière de dette, c'est ce que chaque pays est en train de faire. Je ne sais pas si c'est pour que les autres n'aillent pas plus prendre sur le marché que lui. Donc, lors de l'atelier national, nous avons appelé à une solidarité entre les pays en matière de politique et de stratégie d'endettement. J'ai écouté sur RFI Attali qui dit que l'endettement, c'est juste pour déplacer des crises majeures. Que l'endettement est là pour nous cacher les crises financières majeures, les crises économiques majeures qui doivent se produire, mais qu'on essaye de repousser plus loin avec l'endettement. Ce qu'on a retenu quand même au niveau du Bénin, c'est ce que je sais en tant qu'acteur de la société civile au niveau du Bénin, c'est quand même cette transparence. Le gouvernement du Bénin, quand il va sur le marché financier, informe. Je vais sur le marché financier pour lever des fonds, pour réaliser tel projet. Des projets qui sont structurants. Je vais sur le marché financier pas pour lever des fonds, pour mettre dans des caisses pour payer les salaires, non, c'est pour des investissements. Et donc, la dette, pour nous, elle est bonne si on peut faire des investissements massifs dans le secteur de l'éducation, de la santé, de l'énergie qui a été rappelée ici. La dette, elle est bonne si les citoyens savent ce à quoi servent les fonds qui sont collectés en leur nom. Je voudrais finir pour rejoindre la collègue du Kenya pour dire que le vocabulaire, le langage de la dette, là, on ne comprend pas. À la société civile, les citoyens ne comprennent pas. Donc, il va falloir, nous, en tant qu'acteurs de la société civile, faire ce qu'on appelle peut-être une alphabétisation, c'est-à-dire trouver les mots accessibles aux citoyens pour qu'ils puissent comprendre, quand nous parlons de la dette publique, que les citoyens puissent comprendre, parce que ce n'est pas évident pour nos populations, au nom desquelles on contracte ces dettes, de comprendre tous ces mots et tous ces mécanismes. À Cotonou aussi, lors de l'atelier, nous avons parlé qu'il faut vraiment réformer le mécanisme des DTS du FMI. Nous avons eu la chance que le FMI au Bénin, le représentant, il est resté du début jusqu'à la fin. Il a participé à ces travaux et on a noté au Bénin un besoin aussi bien de la part du FMI que du gouvernement d'échanger avec les acteurs de la société civile. Parce que ça a été une opportunité qui est offerte pour nous expliquer ce qui se fait. Et donc, nous avons saisi cette opportunité pour faire des recommandations. Et je pense que l'une des recommandations, c'est qu'il faut renforcer la solidarité entre les pays. Le Bénin peut être un bon exemple, mais une hirondelle ne fait pas le printemps. Nous l'avons vu ici, ça n'est pas durable si chaque pays invente son mécanisme, etc. Et je pense que ce que nous retenons, moi je retiens d'ici, c'est cette conscience, induire cette conscience sous-régionale, régionale et africaine dans la politique. Le Bénin seul ne peut pas aller loin avec ce que nous avons entendu ici. Et nous avons aussi noté qu'il faut un engagement vraiment en faveur de la transparence dans la gestion de la dette. Donner l'information à temps aux citoyens pour les mettre en capacité d'analyser, de faire leurs commentaires, de se donner une idée. Parce que ce qui nous intéresse, c'est ne pas hypothéquer le développement pour les générations à venir. Donc, je voudrais vous remercier pour l'opportunité et saluer le travail de conscience que AfCODD nous a permis de démarrer au Bénin en matière de suivi de la dette. Merci beaucoup et voilà.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Pierre. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've heard in great detail some of the nuances of what is happening at the national level when it comes to rejuvenating and reinvigorating the national debt movement across the continent. And certainly there are some common threads that are beginning to emerge, and I think this is something that is very exciting when you listen to some of the stories from Benin, Cameroon, Zambia, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, where there is an appetite, there is an opportunity that members of parliament, government officials are looking to engage. And as much as some of us remain sometimes optimistic, we also should err on the side of caution that we are not used as instruments to legitimize also processes that are not correct or are not proper. But needless to say, it's very encouraging that there is also beginning to be a coherent and coordinated message that is emerging about public participation, about the dangers of the IMF programs, about the trade-offs that our governments are having to make in favor of creditors at the expense of delivering public services to our citizens. And of course, the big elephant in the room is the way tax policy is being designed and implemented on citizens that are already overburdened with different types of taxes. So it's very exciting to hear these kind of emerging messages coming out. But at this point, I know we've only got about 10 minutes. I'd like to open it up to the floor in case there's any questions or comments or contributions that colleagues and comrades would like to make in this session with regard to what is happening in their countries. I do know that we did have other sessions in Nigeria, in Uganda, and so on. But I'd also, if you'd like to pose a question or make a comment to any of the presentations that have been made, please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. And if there are none, I know Anne-Marie would be very appreciative because, oh, there's one. Yes, please. If you could please just stand up so that we can get the mic to you.
My name is Helena Ngei from Kenya, and I'll pose my question to my beautiful sister from Kenya. Kenya is operating a devolved system of governance, which, in my opinion, is one of the factors that have driven the issue of debt and sustainability. Just to iterate that we have three pillars of the devolved system of governance. We have the political devolution, we have the administrative devolution, and the fiscal devolution. And there are some two critical elements of human development system that have been devolved. And this is the healthcare services, and the education system is also a devolved service. We are now looking at taking the healthcare services back to the national government because of the issue of the county government ability to sustain healthcare provision at the county government levels because of the issue of lack of finances. Now, if you look at what the government borrowing was for the year 2022, we surpassed the threshold. Yet we have county governments which have inadequate resources to be able to expand these services to the citizenry of the county governments. Looking again at what Jason said, we are looking at a probable default of $2 billion Eurobond in 2024. That goes without saying. There's a looming crunch in 2024. How will we be able, as a country, to sustain 47 county governments and a national government with a looming crunch and inadequate resources at the county governments? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentations that you have made. My question is on this borrowing at local currency. For the past 2 days, I've heard it. Many people that have presented have talked about borrowing at local currency. Now, the IMF and other credit organizations, they are not giving us this money for free. I think they too want to benefit something from it. And there's no way they will allow anybody to borrow at local currency. So my thinking is that the AU should implement the call for the African Monetary Fund so that African countries and the idea of a common currency for African countries, whereby we can borrow. Otherwise, there's no way IMF and World Bank or the bilateral institutions, China, Germany, and France, can give us loans at local currency and you pay back at local currency. No, they want to get something out of they have to get interest that we pay from those loans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Apollinaire.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Jason. Je vais essayer de parler en français. Et donc moi, comme on parle d'activisme et de plaidoyer, je suis beaucoup intéressé par cette thématique parce que si on écoute l'audience et les panélistes, on dirait que nous tous, vraiment, nous sommes dans un environnement où on peut faire du plaidoyer et d'activisme sans problème. Nous savons que la question de la dette, c'est une question épineuse dans certains pays et que c'est difficile de faire le plaidoyer parce que la dette va de pair avec la corruption. Certains pays recourent à la dette parce que c'est la manière la plus facile de financer les budgets, parce que mobiliser domestiquement les ressources, c'est difficile pour eux. Et donc, la dette, quand ils contractent des dettes, c'est plus facile de faire la corruption et de faire des malversations économiques. Et donc, c'est difficile pour certains activistes, en Afrique surtout. J'aimerais vous demander, à vous tous, les panélistes, quelle est la stratégie commune qu'on pourrait établir pour certains pays qui sont encore des places dangereuses pour faire le plaidoyer, parce que les outils, la conscience, la volonté, on en a, mais comment faire dans certains pays où il est encore plus dangereux de faire le plaidoyer et de plaider pour ces réformes et de demander des comptes et de la bonne gouvernance. Et je pense que c'est même le but de telles réunions au niveau continental, c'est pour établir des stratégies communes et voir comment on pourrait s'entraider les uns les autres à travers l'Afrique. Voilà.
Thank you, Apollinaire. So, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to come back to the panel here. There was one question directed to Diana about the devolution, the looming default, and how that would affect funding of the county government. But before I hand it over to respond, perhaps what I'll do is, in the interest of time, maybe we'll just also take this opportunity to give the partners to their wrap-up. So in about a minute, any closing statements based on some of the sentiments like what Apollinaire has mentioned around high risk, and then the comment around local currency as you wrap up in about 1 minute so that we can finish and hand over back to Anne-Marie to take us through the rest of the program. Bertha, please.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up by actually indicating that no hope is not. It was already alluded to from the previous submissions from Malawi stakeholders that in country back we still have that Malawi government has, and so mounting efforts with key stakeholders has always been an opportunity for us. She indicated the open government partnership that the Malawi government has committed to, and so we take to it as a partner that we are going to leverage. Thank you. Summatively, I'm saying not all hope is lost. We have the political will back home in the country. These are the debts contracted 2 decades ago, but the current government has the political will to engage. One side of it is the OGP commitment, which has actually 3 pillars in which MEGIN, but also other civil society organizations would like to leverage on the open parliament, the access to information, but also the pillar on anti-corruption and beneficial ownership aspect. So really, I would want to concur with your sentiments just on that collectively, this is not a battle for CSOs only, Much more that Malawi government is also going into the discussions around debt restructuring. So collective efforts going forward, it's a tool actually to win this battle. I end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. So in my wrapping, I wanted to try and respond to the question by my brother who asked about common strategies for advocacy in dangerous contexts, if I may use his words, operating in dangerous contexts. I would say that the work that we are doing is working in civil society is risky business. We are speaking to power, and it's always not a smooth walk when you are speaking truth to power. When you are trying to awaken the people, the electorate as it were, to show them the faults of those in power, you are definitely going to be seen as an enemy of those in power. So the danger is there, it's unmistakable. But I would then also say that what is important is to navigate carefully. I think our advocacy strategies must mature with time. And we cannot talk about a one-size-fits-all strategy. We are operating in different contexts. Our countries have got different legislations. The room for what would work actually in other contexts may not apply in other contexts. So it has to be suitable and contextual. That would be my response. But again, I just wanted to say that that should not limit us from learning from each other and then adapting appropriately according to context. But maybe what may be common is to speak about the costs of public debt. I consider that public debt is an international relations issue. That is one thing that is common that we can all agree on. And just raising the cost of public debt and speaking that to those in power, they would respect and attend to anything that threatens their stay in power. And therefore, I think that we can leverage around that. Lastly, just to say that there is nothing more powerful than an enlightened citizenry. I think let's invest as much as possible in building citizen agency. This generation of debt activists may not be there tomorrow, but as long as we have invested enough in building strong citizen agency around public finance management, we are assured that there is continued monitoring, continued accountability in public finance management issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll respond to two issues that were raised. And the first one is around the cost of government because of the devolved system. However, to note that the devolved system of government separates roles. It does not anticipate replication of roles. So whether you do away with the county government, we will still have health officials working at the lowest level. But if you just look at even the analysis, Kenya's budget deficit is 700 billion or thereabout, and the amount that's going to the counties is about 400 billion. So even if you did away with the counties, you would still have a deficit. Now, as the Okoa-Uchumi Coalition, whereas we know government expenditure must be rationalized, we have identified that the biggest problem is misappropriation of expenditure, not so much around the human resource, but around budgeted corruption. The amount of money we lose in corruption and illicit flows over the last 10 years is higher than our annual deficit. And I think most Kenyans would agree something changed, and there has even been a decentralization of development because of devolution. So I would say let us, and Africa-wide, let us defend decentralization of power, of fiscal resources to the lowest level, because that even grows the levels of accountability. In Kenya, we see higher levels of investment by people, citizens, with county processes of budget, social accountability compared to the national level. County governments in Kenya control 15% of the national revenue and income. The national government still controls 85% and has significantly lower safeguards. Then the second area, as I close, is around, can we ever use our local currency? And all I will say is, conviction, my fellow Africans. The minute we are convicted that we are powerful enough to negotiate differently, the capital owners in their action will not outpower us. The solution may not be the currency per se, but we must be convicted enough to negotiate with the world disorder differently. Thank you.
Adding up to respond to your question in terms of potential strategies that can be used by civil society organizations, especially those that are working in quite troubled regimes or systems, I think there are some lessons that can be learned from Zambia. The immediate past regime was quite brutal, I should make mention. We had incidences where, like some of our members of staff from my organization got arrested just for engaging stakeholders on issues around the national budget and public debt. But one of the things that we did as civil society organizations around that time was to mobilize and go to the people. And in going to the people, we decided to make the issue of public debt an election issue, more especially that we're heading towards the elections. So if there is a moment in that particular country, let's say elections, and there is room to mobilize and make public debt an election issue, I think it worked very well for us. And in our message to the public and to the people, we're basically trying to explain how public debt concerns them and helping to draw the connection in terms of debt that is acquired, its utilization, and the implications that it has on the quality of life. And we do think that it greatly contributed to the huge turn-up in terms of numbers of young people that showed up to vote, but not only voting, they went a step further in terms of wanting to protect the vote that they had casted. That is one strategy that I can recommend to civil society organizations that might find themselves in a situation or circumstance a bit similar to what happened in Zambia 2 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I wish to thank the two participants who asked the question on the local currency and on the common strategy, because they will help me wrap up here the way I wanted to do it. And then to finish, I would deliver to AfCODD the message that people in Cameroon asked me to deliver. I think the lesson that we can learn from the situation, the session that we had in Cameroon is that we should now capitalize on our continental free trade area. We don't need it to be perfect, as our brother said last time, but we need to do it now, right now, because actually the solutions lies out at our feet, and we seem to ignore it. Look, imagine that Africa, which is the continent, the richest continent in the world in terms of natural resources, imagine that Africa decided that henceforth you will be buying our natural resources with our local currency. Imagine what would happen. All of these people who are out there, they need these natural resources. And if Africa decided that you will be buying that in our local currency, the only thing left to do is to make sure that you have a common currency in Africa. And when you've got that common currency in Africa, within the implementation of the continental free trade area, people will be forced to bring their foreign currency to come and buy the African currency because they need the natural resources. So that is the solution. I mean, we've been discussing here, I think that's the solution because we have that at our feet. So if we go that way, then you understand why we will force people, or when we borrow, we will say we are borrowing in our local currency. That local currency is not the shilling in Kenya or the naira in Nigeria. It is the African common currency. If it is the African common currency, then you can be sure that we are getting rid of this debt problem in Africa. Now, second thing about the strategy. What is the common strategy? From what we saw in Cameroon, by bringing all stakeholders together to discuss the debt situation, we realized that the best strategy for us is try to get a kind of championing within each group of stakeholders. If you identify champions, even in the governmental sector, be it a good or a bad government, if you have champion in there, you have champion in the parliament, you have champions in the private sector, and then you get with these champions to work together, and the kind of work that you do with them should be a work that gives them the knowledge that what you are bringing is to help in what they are trying to do, not to oppose them or not to be in argument with them. It is you must also identify what their interest is to shape your contribution according to that interest. Now to finish the message. The message that came out of the session in Cameroon, I better read it because I don't want to change it. Let me just read it. So participants in Cameroon unanimously declared Cameroon's readiness to host the next AfCODD. And they hope that AfCODD will permit that. And they challenged me to deliver this message. I think I've taken the challenge. Thank you.
Pour donner un essai de réponse aux collègues du Burundi, je pense que il y a un travail que la société civile doit faire, c'est d'étudier les profils de nos dirigeants. Je veux dire, d'étudier leur psychologie. Parce que l'approche qui peut aller pour un tel ne peut pas aller pour l'autre. Et nous, au Bénin, nous avons réussi à faire ce travail avec le gouvernement que nous avons là. C'est un gouvernement, si vous faites de l'activisme, vous allez à la télé, vous parlez, bon, ça leur glisse sur la peau. C'est le chien à boire, la caravane passe. Mais c'est un gouvernement qui veut que vous vous approchiez des ministères et autres pour aborder les questions. Et là, ils se sentent qu'ils n'ont pas été jetés à la place publique. Et comme mon prédécesseur l'a dit, nous devons avoir des entrées, donc même au niveau du gouvernement, au niveau du Parlement, des points d'entrée sur lesquels nous devons nous fonder, nous appuyer pour faire passer nos messages. Et pour finir, je pense que ces jours-ci, nous avons constaté aussi dans cette salle combien l'Afrique est divisée. Combien l'Afrique est divisée. Il y a beaucoup... Les devises, par exemple, chaque pays a sa monnaie. Au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, la CEDEAO, nous disons que nous devons avoir une monnaie commune. Et ce processus est repoussé à chaque fois, ou bien même saboté de l'intérieur de la CEDEAO par des chefs d'État. Et donc, c'est la question de... Nous sommes réunis sur des questions ici qui nous dépassent en tant que pays isolés, mais qui ne peuvent être portées que par une unité de une union, donc pas comment on appelle l'Union africaine, donc des pays unis, et parce que l'Afrique est très divisée. Et dans cette division, ceux qui n'ont pas intérêt à ce que ceux qui ont intérêt à ce que nous soyons toujours sous domination sont contents. Et je pense tout ce qu'on dit sur la dette. Comment parler de la dette, par exemple, sans aussi parler des thèmes de l'échange qui ne sont pas bons? Nous produisons les matières premières, mais nous ne pouvons pas aussi les transformer sur place. Donc c'est un ensemble de problématiques qu'il faudrait adresser en faisant encore appel à l'unité africaine, qu'une seule hirondelle ne peut pas faire le printemps. Pour finir, au niveau interne, donc nous devons améliorer nos politiques budgétaires. En tout cas, c'est ce qui se fait au Bénin. Améliorer la politique budgétaire, accroître chaque pays, accroître la mobilisation des ressources internes. Pour limiter notre dépendance à l'extérieur, il faut accroître la mobilisation des ressources internes. Et pour finir, pour que le citoyen soit heureux de constater les ressources mobilisées à l'extérieur ont servi à quelque chose, il faut que nous améliorons aussi l'efficacité des dépenses. L'efficacité des dépenses et que nous investissions massivement dans les secteurs, comme je l'avais dit, l'énergie, la santé, l'éducation, l'agriculture. Et donc, c'est sur ces mots d'appel à l'unité des pays africains, des décideurs et même la société civile, parce que c'est la société civile ici réunie qui doit pouvoir remonter ce besoin, cette nécessité d'unité de notre continent. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. A round of applause for the entire panel, please. Thank you once again. Thank you all very much. I'm now going to hand over to Anne-Marie to take us through the next two sessions till the close. Thank you all very much.
Et merci beaucoup à vous, Jason. Merci également aux panélistes pour cette discussion. J'espère que vous appréciez justement la qualité des débats aujourd'hui. C'est assez impressionnant. Et je retiendrai particulièrement cette question d'unité qui a été mentionnée tout au long de cette discussion. Je pense qu'il est un petit peu triste finalement qu'on en soit encore à eh bien, renforcer, essayer d'arriver à ce véritable panafricanisme quand on sait que déjà du temps des indépendances, eh bien, on nous le disait déjà, l'union fait la force, l'union de l'Afrique fera la force de l'Afrique et que eh bien, le panafricanisme, c'est le futur. Et le futur, je le rappelle encore, c'est aujourd'hui. Donc, très, très beau message. Alors, avant de procéder à la prochaine table ronde, j'ai juste quelques petites informations. Sachez que le café, donc juste là, ouvrira ses portes dans quelques instants. Donc, n'hésitez pas à y aller à votre gré et à vous rafraîchir. Je vais également partager une bonne nouvelle. Les hashtags de cette conférence sont tout en haut des listes des hashtags les plus utilisés au Sénégal depuis mercredi. Donc, bravo à vous. Je vais vous encourager à continuer. Absolument. Eh oui. C'est très très beau et finalement ça témoigne de l'intérêt que vous portez pour cette question de la dette et de l'endettement. Donc continuez à aller sur les réseaux sociaux, continuez à partager, à discuter et l'équipe d'AfCODD, je vous l'assure, eh bien prend en compte tout ce que vous partagez et vous tiendra d'ailleurs informé au travers des réseaux sociaux et sur le site d'AfCODD de vos commentaires et prendront le temps d'y répondre. Alors, mesdames et messieurs, comment est-ce que notre continent peut-il tirer son épingle du jeu sur l'échiquier politico-économique dans ce contexte d'instabilité globale ? Instabilité créée par ailleurs, on en parle depuis le début de cette conférence, très très souvent par des forces externes, mais aussi, il faut quand même se l'avouer, de mauvaises habitudes qui perdure au sein de nos communautés, de nos sociétés. Et pour reprendre d'ailleurs les propos de Barbara Kalimafiri, présidente du Conseil d'AfCODD, il s'agit plutôt d'un désordre mondial et non d'un ordre mondial. Alors l'Afrique finalement se retrouve prise dans un dérèglement du monde et des crises qui ne sont pas les siennes. Et la question qu'on va se poser au cours de la prochaine discussion, c'est est-ce que la solution ou l'une des solutions serait une autonomie stratégique comme prônée par les BRICS, notamment l'Inde. Et pour en parler, eh bien, je suis ravie d'appeler nos prochains panélistes. Tout d'abord, Monsieur Anthony Samba Boulouma, qui est directeur exécutif de l'Association des jeunes parlementaires du Kenya. Accueillez, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur Boulouma. J'appelle également Madame Shenae Mukumba, qui est directrice exécutive du Réseau pour la justice fiscale en Afrique. Applaudissements. Et enfin, Monsieur Briggs Bamba, directeur de programme à Trust Africa, une fondation panafricaine qui promeut la bonne gouvernance et un développement équitable. Applaudissements également pour Monsieur Bamba. Thank you very much. Monsieur Bomba, est-ce qu'on sera 3 ? Ah. This one, please. Thank you. Est-ce que vous avez des micros ? Je vais vous laisser celui-là. You can share this one. Soyez les bienvenus, une fois de plus. Welcome to you all. Alors, je vais d'abord commencer par vous demander, je vais poser la même question à chacun d'entre vous. L'autonomie stratégique de l'Afrique, vous l'envisagez comment et qu'est-ce que cela signifie pour vous en termes concrets ? Je vais commencer avec vous, Monsieur Boulouma. Bien sûr. L'autonomie stratégique de l'Afrique, vous l'envisagez comment ? Et en des termes concrets, qu'est-ce que cela signifie pour vous ? Une grande question. Oh, shall I say it in English?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I must say that I'm very delighted to be part and parcel of this gathering of great minds that represent the greatness of our soil here in Africa. In Kenya, I am the head of the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association, which is a platform for young members of parliament. And maybe just to dive to the question at hand, I want to pick this from a quote that was given by Albert Einstein, who was a highly celebrated physicist and scientist. And he observed that the significant problems that are faced in this world can never and will never be solved by the same thinking that caused the problem. So this one boils from the very thinking that as Africans we've been poisoned with. Because I followed through all our conversations and contributions. They all rotate around problems imposed by the West. They all rotate around challenges imposed by the West. But I want to disagree. I feel like part of it is also African shared, because we have allowed ourselves to buy into poisoned narratives that do not necessarily reflect who we are. And this is practical in this sense. For example, the model used in terms of measuring wealth of nations is a model that was not entirely African. It was designed to project the West as being very wealthy because they use GDP, which focuses on issues outside natural capital. If we were to, for example, remodel and say, for example, let's measure the global wealth on the account of natural capital and resources, do you think we'd be talking of Africa the same? I think we'll be the wealthiest continent. We will actually be the wealthy countries bragging across the globe. So for a start, we must, first of all, disabuse narratives that have been imposed on us. We must disagree with the publications that are foreign in nature and are talking about Africa, because that's the foundation to the problems that bedevil us. Our parliaments are prisons. Prisons because of infiltration, and our memberships have been invaded and poisoned with the Western thinking to believe that the only thing that can work in Africa has to be borrowed from the West. Hence the reason why we are struggling with these challenges of debt, because we are only responding to their strategies, the Bretton Woods strategies. And once their strategies are clear, they impose it on us. So if we want to create a strategy, we create it based on their script. So I strongly believe that the autonomy we are looking for in our parliaments, in our spaces of leadership, must start by, first of all, Africans re-examining the knowledge we have about ourselves, Africans re-examining the literature that has been written about us, and then building on the foundation of a paradigm shift in our thinking. Then we can begin to now properly address these challenges that we are talking about. Because, like I said, for us to actually emancipate ourselves completely, it will not just wait for us to break down the shackles that have been put on us physically. It must, and they say the colonialists left physically, but they left their presence mentally. So we must disabuse the literature, the thinking that has been imposed on us, and begin to reimagine Africa afresh. And somebody pointed out that one of the conversations that came out from the country-specific discussions was on how are we preparing the next generation for Africa. Because, yes, we are all gathered. A lot of us probably are aging. But are we doing enough to prepare the next generation of leaders of Africa to... Yes, yes. Thank you.
I don't want you to Let's pace ourselves because I know that you have a lot to say on that topic. Keyword here, wait. How long are we going to wait? I think that was very important. And truly, there is nothing to wait. We are the change that we're waiting for. So thank you very much. Mrs. Mukumba, I'd like to ask you the same question, please. Qu'est-ce que cela vous inspire, cette autonomie stratégique?
Thank you for that question. So I think for me, it will require a two-pronged approach. Over the past 2-3 days, we've been having conversations about what we need to do in order to address this debt situation. And so this conversation has been happening at two levels. There has been a discussion about what we need to do domestically, the type of inward-looking introspection that we need to do, right? So looking at our political systems, looking at our legislation, looking at issues such as corruption, etc. And that's absolutely an important element of this work. But I think what is equally important and must happen at the same time is the continued pushback against what's happening within the international financial architecture. I'm currently at present reading sort of two books, one of them being this one that AfCODD is so kindly sharing with us, as well as another one written by Martin Meredith on the state of Africa. And as I was reading the two books, it was interesting because what was quite striking was round about the time when the Bretton Woods Conference was happening, at the other side of the world, in the late 1940s, a gentleman named Sir Charles Arden Clarke was having sleepless nights because there was a troublesome prisoner who essentially was causing him problems, this prisoner named Kwame Nkrumah, right? And the reason he was causing him problems was because he'd started this political party that had the motto, self-governance now. And for me, that was so striking because there were conversations about the development of the international financial architecture and the rules that need to govern that, whilst we were still trying to figure out who we were. So because we weren't part and parcel of those decisions, they are highly skewed outside of us, and so we need to continuously be pushing back for the overhaul of those institutions, whilst at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, we're also doing the introspective work of looking at what do we need to do internally as well to make sure that we aren't, in a sense, I guess one would say cutting ourselves at our knees, right? So it requires a multi-pronged approach in order to reach the autonomy you're talking about.
Thank you very much. Very beautifully said. And I now turn to you, Mr. Bomba. What is your take on this?
Good morning. I'm never very comfortable speaking whilst I'm seated. So this is the home of AfCODD III. It's the home of Sheikh Anta Diop. It's the home of Trust Africa. It's the home of Aikwe Ama. And our founding chairperson here is Opa. And there's a lot of intellectuals in the house, public intellectuals. So I don't think we are out of space. If we at least take a few steps on the intellectual terrain and engage really deeply in terms of ideas around the questions that you are putting before us. And I think the starting point for me is a correct characterization of the moment. We've had it since day one, but a few things bear re-emphasis. It's an unprecedented moment of crisis, maybe the deepest crisis in a generation. It's a multifaceted crisis. It manifests on the economic front, it manifests on the political front, it manifests on the climate front, it manifests on the democracy and governance front. It's an all-encompassing crisis. We've never met such levels of uncertainty as humanity as we currently confront today. But what's important, I think, is to understand that in this particular case, we are talking of crisis in a very classical sense of saying we've gone beyond what we could call a problem, something that you can resolve at the same level of thinking or within the same paradigms of thought that have already existed. For a crisis of the magnitude we are talking about, we are talking of having to think outside the box and really having to put forward radical ideas that can provide a line of sight for humanity, maybe for the next 50 to 100 years. I think when we say crisis, we are saying that the anchor idea that has defined the world, that has created what we are calling the world order in this conversation, has become exhausted. It no longer has energy, it no longer has solutions to answer humanity's biggest challenges of the day on all these fronts: politics, economics, climate, society, across the board. So what's required in a very big sense is a new anchor idea that can move us forward. And this is the context within which we are asking the question: how can Africa exercise strategic autonomy in this particular moment? It's a question easier asked than answered, because I think for you to be a rule maker, as AfCODD is encouraging us, it's not just a matter of raising your voice. It's not just a moral question to say we are also human beings, we exist, we are 1 billion of us, we are in Africa. It's a question of power. World orders throughout human history have always been defined by the most powerful. The current world order that is collapsing, for all intents and purposes, is an American-defined world order. It was defined at the end of the Second World War, and America had 80% of the global currency at that point, 50% of the global economy, the most powerful military in the world. So that's why the IMF, the World Bank are headquartered in Washington, D.C., and the UN is in New York, and the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. They were the most powerful country at that moment, and they defined this world order. We are at a moment where we are saying it's crumbling. And I think a quick answer to your question is to then say, as Africa, we need to think about how do we build ourselves into a power so that we have a right to sit on the table. Putin is an extremely cynical person. He recently said the fight that's playing out globally is an extremely brutal fight. And it's a fight that requires only those who are sovereign to sit around the table. And then those who are not sovereign will be split amongst the sovereigns. So we are back to the Berlin Conference moment. There's a whole new scramble for Africa. It is not guaranteed. We cannot claim the guarantee that we'll be able to sit and define this world order. We need to build ourselves into a power. It means engaging on the terrain of ideas, and much more specifically, engaging around the definition of the political system at the global order, the economic system at the global order, and we've got a lot of things that we can share in terms of deepening the question that you have put before us. Let me leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it's true, at the end of the day, we cannot keep on doing the same things and expect a different outcome. And it's not necessarily the one who speaks the louder that is the most heard. So thank you very much. This is very powerful. Je vais repasser au français pour revenir vers vous. Monsieur Boulouma, vous avez commencé à nous en parler tout à l'heure. Vous êtes très actif au niveau de la jeunesse. Alors, les jeunes Africains représentent environ 70% de la population totale du continent. Plus de 200 millions d'Africains, en fait, ont entre 15 et 24 ans. Et ce chiffre devrait même doubler d'ici les 20 prochaines années. Autre chiffre très impressionnant, mais un petit peu quand même cynique, eh bien, les jeunes représentent 60% de l'ensemble des chômeurs sur le continent. Alors, Monsieur Boulouma, j'aimerais vous demander comment faire pour que cette jeunesse ne devienne pas une bombe à retardement et comment est-ce que vous les aidez à votre niveau à mieux comprendre et à gérer les crises?
Thank you very much for that question. I think straight on, I would point out a few things. One, there has been a call for African unity. Unity of purpose, unity of economics, and even political federation, if possible. I think that's one way of actually consolidating Africans, so as for us to gain the kind of strength that we need to deal with challenges such as the youth time bomb and the opportunities thereof. My own thinking is that for us to be able to consolidate, because what exists, and sometimes we are careful not to say this, is because amongst ourselves, sometimes there's challenges facing our youth are somewhat related. And for us to be able to address them, we need to consolidate our voice and champion for youth issues as one voice within the continent. And now we have created amongst ourselves an African network that we are calling the Africa Young Parliamentarians Network. This network is intended to allow us to start talking to each other, sharing strategies. Like, for example, in the Kenyan context, we did introduce a policy within our government system that sets aside all 30% of government procurement opportunities to go to young people, women, and persons with disability. Another country can borrow that idea.